For years, my relatives didn't remember my birthday, but threw lavish celebrations for my sister. This time I stayed silent and bought a country house with a bonus they had no idea about. When I posted the photos, venomous comments poured in, which turned to horror. You know, I never thought I'd be the type of person to tell this kind of story. I mean, I always kept my head down, did my job, paid my taxes, and tried to be a good daughter. But sometimes life has a way of showing you who people really are. And when that happens, you can't just pretend everything's fine anymore. My name is Sarah, and I've been dealing with this situation for about 12 years now. It all started when I was 26 and my little sister Emma turned 21. Before that, birthdays in our family were pretty normal. Mom would make a cake, we'd have dinner at home, maybe go to Olive Garden if we were feeling fancy. Nothing crazy, but it was nice. It felt like family. Everything changed after Emma graduated college. I remember the exact moment because it was so weird at the time. We were all sitting around Mom's kitchen table, that old wooden one she's had since the 80s with the scratches from when we used to do homework on it. The smell of her vanilla candles was everywhere, and there were crumbs from the birthday cake still scattered on the table. Emma had just blown out her candles, and everyone was laughing about something she'd said. Then Mom cleared her throat in that way she does when she's about to make an announcement. She had this look on her face, kind of excited but also nervous, like she was about to tell us she'd won the lottery or something. "You know," she said, carefully picking up the cake crumbs with her napkin, "Emma's really accomplished so much. She graduated summa cum laude, she got that internship at the law firm, she's dating that nice boy Tyler." She paused and looked around the table. "I think next year we should do something really special for her birthday. Something big." Dad nodded along, already reaching for his wallet like he always does when Mom gets an idea. My Aunt Linda, who was visiting from Phoenix, clapped her hands together. "Oh, that sounds wonderful. Emma deserves it." I just sat there, still holding my fork with a bite of cake on it, watching everyone get excited about this plan for my sister. And I thought, okay, that's nice. Emma did do well in school. She deserved to be celebrated. But something about the way they were talking felt off. Like they were planning something exclusive, something that was just for her. That feeling turned out to be right. The next year, when Emma's 22nd birthday rolled around, they threw her a party at the country club, the actual country club where Dad plays golf on Sundays. They rented out the private dining room, had it catered by that fancy place downtown, hired a photographer, the whole 9 yards. Emma wore this gorgeous emerald dress that Mom had taken her shopping for specifically for the party. She looked like a princess. I found out about it 3 days before it happened. I was at Mom's house helping her organize her closet, something she'd been putting off for months, when I saw the invitation sitting on her desk. It was one of those thick, cream-colored cards with gold lettering. Very classy, very expensive. It said, "Join us in celebrating Emma's 22nd birthday," and had all the details about the country club. "Oh," I said, holding the invitation and trying to keep my voice casual. "This looks nice. When did you decide to do this?" Mom looked up from the pile of old sweaters we were sorting through. She had this expression I'd never seen before, kind of guilty but also defiant. "We've been planning it for a few weeks. Emma really wanted something elegant this year." "That's great," I said, putting the invitation back down. "I'm excited to celebrate with her." There was this long pause where Mom just kept folding sweaters, not looking at me. Finally, she said, "Actually, sweetie, this one's going to be more of an intimate affair. Just family and Emma's closest friends. You know how the country club is about numbers?" I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I am family. Of course you are, Mom said quickly. It's just that Emma specifically asked to keep it small, and with Tyler's family coming and her sorority sisters. She trailed off, still not looking at me. I stood there in her bedroom, surrounded by piles of old clothes and the smell of her lavender sachets, and I felt like I was in some kind of alternate reality. My own mother was uninviting me to my sister's birthday party. Not in a mean way, not with anger, but with this casual explanation like it made perfect sense. I understand, I heard myself say, even though I didn't understand at all. That was my first real clue that things had changed in my family. But I convinced myself it was just a one-time thing. Emma was starting her career. She was in a new relationship. She wanted to impress Tyler's family. It hurt, but I could rationalize it. Except then my birthday came around 2 months later. April 15th, tax day, which has always been a joke in our family because who wants a birthday on tax day? But Mom usually made it special anyway. She'd make my favorite chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast, and we'd have dinner somewhere nice, just the family. That year, I got a card in the mail. A generic happy birthday card from Hallmark with a $20 bill inside. The kind of card you send to your co-worker's kid or your neighbor. Inside, Mom had written, "Hope you have a wonderful day. Love, Mom and Dad." No phone call, no dinner invitation, no acknowledgement that I was turning 27, that I'd just gotten promoted at work, that I'd been dealing with some health issues and could have used some family support. Just a card with $20, like I was some distant relative they barely remembered. I sat in my apartment that night, eating takeout Chinese food by myself, and I tried to tell myself it was no big deal. People get busy, families drift apart sometimes. Maybe Mom forgot because she'd been stressed about Dad's back surgery. Maybe they thought I was too busy with work to celebrate. But deep down, I knew something had fundamentally shifted. The way they'd planned Emma's elaborate party while forgetting my birthday entirely wasn't a coincidence. It was a choice. I just didn't realize yet how much worse it was going to get. The pattern continued the next year. Emma's 23rd birthday party was even bigger than the first one. This time they rented out the entire back patio of some trendy restaurant downtown. There were string lights everywhere, a live acoustic guitarist, custom cocktails named after Emma's favorite things. I saw the photos on Facebook because Emma posted about 50 of them. In every single photo, she looked radiant, genuinely happy, surrounded by people who clearly adored her. Mom and Dad were beaming in the background, Dad in his good suit and Mom in that navy dress she saves for special occasions. All of Emma's friends were there, Tyler's whole family, even some of her college professors. It looked like the kind of celebration you'd throw for someone graduating medical school or getting married. My birthday that year. Another card, this time with $15 instead of $20. I started to notice other things too, like how family conversations had begun to revolve around Emma's achievements, Emma's relationship, Emma's future plans. When I'd try to share news about my own life, like when I got accepted to that photography course I'd been wanting to take, or when I finally paid off my student loans, the conversation would somehow drift back to Emma within minutes. "That's great about your loans, Sarah," Dad would say. "You know, Emma's been looking into graduate school programs. She might not need loans at all if she gets that scholarship." Or Mom would say, "Photography sounds fun, honey. Emma's been taking some amazing pictures on her trips with Tyler. Did you see the ones from their weekend in Napa?" It was like I'd become a supporting character in the story of my own family, not the villain. They were always polite to me, always included me in regular family dinners and holiday gatherings. But not the star either. just background noise. The worst part was how gradual it all felt. If someone had told me when I was 25 that my parents would basically stop acknowledging my birthday while throwing increasingly elaborate celebrations for my sister, I would have laughed. That sounded like something that happened to other people. People with obviously dysfunctional families or dramatic soap opera lives. But this wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, almost gentle in its cruelty. Every slight was small enough to rationalize, every disappointment came with a reasonable explanation. I couldn't point to any single moment and say, this is when they stopped loving me, because they never stopped saying they loved me. They just stopped showing it in ways that mattered. By the time Emma turned 24, I'd learned not to expect anything for my own birthday. I'd made peace with it, or at least I thought I had. I'd started planning my own celebrations, taking myself out to nice dinners, buying myself the gifts I wanted. It was lonely, but it felt more honest than sitting around waiting for phone calls that never came. That year's party for Emma was the most extravagant yet. They rented a private room at the nicest hotel in town, hired a professional DJ, had a full dinner with multiple courses. The theme was a night in Paris, because Emma had studied abroad there junior year. There were Eiffel Tower centerpieces and French pastries, and even a champagne fountain. I know all these details because Emma live-streamed parts of it on Instagram. I watched from my couch, in my pajamas, eating ice cream straight from the container and feeling like a creep for spying on my own family celebration. But what really got to me wasn't the party itself. It was something I noticed in the background of one of Emma's videos. Mom was talking to someone I couldn't see, gesturing excitedly with her hands, the way she does when she's really passionate about something. And I could hear her saying, "We've been planning this for months. Every detail has to be perfect. Emma deserves the absolute best." Months. They'd spent months planning Emma's birthday party. Meanwhile, they'd forgotten mine so completely that the card arrived 3 days late. That's when I finally understood that this wasn't about Emma being the favorite child or about me being overlooked. This was about me being actively erased from the family narrative. Not through any dramatic confrontation or angry words, but through this systematic diminishing of my importance in their lives. And I realized I had a choice to make. I could keep accepting this treatment, keep making excuses for them, keep pretending it didn't hurt as much as it did. Or I could start protecting myself and building a life that didn't depend on their validation. I chose the second option. The decision to stop expecting anything from my family was both the hardest and most liberating choice I'd ever made. It took me about 6 months to really commit to it, though. You know how it is when you're trying to break a habit that's been part of your life for years. Part of you keeps hoping things will go back to how they used to be. I started small. Instead of calling Mom every Sunday like I'd been doing since college, I waited for her to call me. The first week, she didn't. The second week, still nothing. By week 3, I realized she probably hadn't even noticed the change. That told me everything I needed to know about how much those conversations had meant to her. I also stopped volunteering to help with family events. For years, I'd been the one who showed up early to help set up, who stayed late to clean up, who brought extra chairs from my apartment when they needed them. I was always the reliable one, the one who could be counted on to handle the boring stuff while Emma got to be the star of the show. So when Mom mentioned they were planning a baby shower for our cousin Jessica, I just said, "That sounds nice," and waited to see if they'd ask for my help. They didn't. The shower happened without me, and judging by the photos, it was lovely. They'd managed just fine without my folding chairs and my willingness to wash dishes. The real test came when Emma's 25th birthday approached. This time, I heard about the party plans through my Aunt Linda. who called to ask if I was excited about the big celebration they were planning. "What celebration?" I asked, genuinely confused. There was this awkward pause, and I could practically hear Linda realizing she'd stepped in something. "Oh," she said carefully. "I thought you'd know about it. Maybe I misunderstood." But she hadn't misunderstood. They were throwing Emma another huge party, this time at some vineyard outside town. A weekend-long celebration with overnight accommodations for out-of-town guests. The whole extended family was invited. Except me. This time, I didn't feel that crushing disappointment I'd felt in previous years. Instead, I felt something that surprised me. Relief. Because now I knew exactly where I stood, and I could plan accordingly. I used that weekend to do something I'd been putting off for months. I drove to the coast, found a little bed and breakfast in this tiny town I'd never heard of, and spent 3 days by myself just thinking and reading and walking on the beach. No social media, no phone calls, no checking to see what I was missing. It was the best weekend I'd had in years. When I got back, I had missed calls and texts from a few family members asking where I'd been, why I hadn't been at Emma's party. I responded honestly, I hadn't been invited, so I'd made other plans. The responses were all variations of, "Oh, I'm sure it was just an oversight," or, "You know how busy Mom gets with planning." But here's the thing. I was done with those excuses. An oversight doesn't happen 5 years in a row. Busy doesn't explain why they had time to plan elaborate celebrations for one daughter while consistently forgetting the other one existed. That's when I made my second big decision. I was going to focus on building my own life, my own success, my own happiness. And I was going to do it quietly, without fanfare, without asking for anyone's approval or support. I'd been working at the same marketing firm for about 4 years, doing good work but never really pushing for advancement because I'd always been focused on other things. Family obligations, trying to maintain relationships that weren't being reciprocated, spending my energy on people who didn't appreciate it. Now I channeled all that energy into my career instead. I started staying late to work on projects that weren't assigned to me, volunteering for the campaigns that other people thought were too challenging or too boring. I took online courses to learn new skills. I networked like my life depended on it. My boss, Janet, noticed the change pretty quickly. "Sarah," she said one afternoon, stopping by my desk with that look she gets when she's impressed by something. "The Morrison campaign presentation you put together was exceptional. Where did this come from?" I looked up from my computer, where I was working on another unsolicited proposal that would probably make the company a lot of money. "I've just been thinking about what I want to accomplish here," I said. "Well, whatever you're doing, keep doing it," she said. "We need to talk about your career trajectory soon." That conversation led to a promotion 6 months later. Not a big one, but enough to give me a significant raise and some real responsibility. More importantly, it gave me confidence that I could succeed without my family's support or recognition. The promotion came with an unexpected bonus, a performance incentive that I hadn't even known existed. $15,000. Paid out quarterly over the year based on meeting certain targets. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was more than I'd ever had in savings at one time. I didn't tell anyone about it. Not my family, not my friends, not even my coworker Lisa, who I usually shared everything with. Something about keeping it to myself felt important. Like I needed to prove to myself that I could handle success without immediately looking for external validation. Instead, I started researching something I'd dreamed about for years but never thought I could afford. Buying property. Not just any property, but something special. A place that would be mine alone, where I could create the kind of life I actually wanted instead of the one I'd been settling for. I spent months looking at listings online, learning about mortgages and property taxes and home inspections. I drove out to rural areas on weekends, exploring small towns and back roads, trying to figure out what kind of place would make me happy. That's how I found Millbrook. It's this tiny, unincorporated community about 40 minutes outside the city, right at the edge of wine country. Rolling hills, old oak trees, the kind of place where people have actual front porches and know their neighbors' names. Most of the houses were built in the 1920s and 30s, before developers figured out how to squeeze as many units as possible onto every lot. The house that caught my eye was at the end of a dead-end road, sitting on 2.5 acres of overgrown but beautiful land. It was a 1932 craftsman bungalow that needed work, but had incredible bones. Original hardwood floors, a stone fireplace, windows that actually opened to let in real air instead of just recycled conditioning. The listing said it had been empty for 8 months after the previous owner, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, had moved to assisted living. Her family wanted to sell quickly, which meant the price was reasonable, at least by current market standards. I called the realtor on a Tuesday afternoon, expecting to schedule a viewing for the weekend. Instead, she said, "How about tomorrow? I'm showing it to another couple on Thursday, and the family really wants to move fast on this." I took a personal day and met her at the house Wednesday morning. The moment I stepped onto that wraparound porch and heard nothing but birds and wind through the trees, I knew I was home. The inside needed updating. The kitchen was probably original to the house, and the single bathroom had pink tile that screamed 1950s. But everything was solid and well maintained. Mrs. Henderson had clearly loved the place. There were built-in bookshelves in the living room, a breakfast nook with windows that looked out over what used to be a garden, and a sunroom that would be perfect for reading or working on my photography. The property includes that old barn out back, the realtor mentioned as we walked through. Needs some work, but it's structurally sound. Could be great storage or maybe a workshop if you're handy. I wasn't particularly handy, but standing in that house, looking out at land that could be mine, I felt like I could learn to be. I felt like I could learn to be anything I wanted. I made an offer that afternoon. Full asking price, with a clause that I could close in 30 days if the inspection went well. The realtor seemed surprised by how quickly I decided. But I'd learned to trust my instincts about the things that really mattered. The family accepted my offer the next day. For the next month, while lawyers handled paperwork and inspectors crawled around the property, I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. When people asked why I seemed distracted or why I was spending so many weekend afternoons running errands, I just said I was keeping busy. The truth was, I was terrified that if I talked about it too much, something would go wrong. That the mortgage would fall through, or the inspection would reveal some catastrophic problem, or someone with more money would swoop in with a better offer. But also, I was starting to understand the power of keeping things to myself. For years, I'd shared every small victory and minor setback with my family, looking for their approval or sympathy. Now I was discovering what it felt like to have something that was entirely mine, something they couldn't diminish or overshadow with their own priorities. The closing was scheduled for a Friday in late October. I took the whole day off work and met my lawyer at the title company downtown. The process was surprisingly anticlimactic. A lot of signing papers and writing checks, with periodic explanations of things I didn't entirely understand, but trusted were legitimate. Then the previous owner's son handed me a ring with 2 keys on it, shook my hand, and said, "Congratulations. Mom would be happy knowing the place is going to someone who appreciates it." I drove to Millbrook that afternoon with a bottle of sparkling cider and a sense of unreality. I kept expecting someone to call and tell me there had been a mistake, that I couldn't actually afford this, that houses like this weren't for people like me. But when I turned my key in that front door and stepped into my living room, the feeling that washed over me wasn't disbelief. It was completion. Like I'd finally found the place where I belonged. I spent that first weekend just being in the house. I didn't unpack anything or try to make immediate improvements. I just sat in different rooms at different times of day, figuring out how the light changed and where I wanted to put my furniture and how quiet it could be when there was no traffic or sirens or neighbors arguing through thin walls. On Sunday evening, I was sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun set over the hills, when I realized something important. I was completely happy, not excited about future possibilities or relieved that something stressful was over, but genuinely content in the present moment. I couldn't remember the last time I'd felt that way. That's when I decided it was time to share my news with the world. Not because I needed anyone else's approval, but because I was proud of what I'd accomplished and wanted to celebrate it properly. I spent the next week taking photos of the house and property. Not just quick snapshots, but real photographs that captured what the place felt like. The morning light coming through the kitchen window, the view from the sunroom, the old barn with morning glory vines growing up its walls. Then I wrote a simple post for social media. Excited to share that I bought my first house. It's a 1932 Craftsman on a couple of acres in Millbrook. Lots of work ahead. But I'm so grateful to have found this special place. I posted it on Instagram and Facebook simultaneously, along with a dozen photos that showed the house's character and potential. Then I put my phone on silent and went to bed early, exhausted from the emotional intensity of finally sharing something I'd kept secret for so long. I had no idea what I was about to wake up to. When I woke up Saturday morning and checked my phone, I had 63 notifications. Not the usual handful of likes and congratulatory comments I expected, but a flood of activity that made my stomach clench before I even started reading. The first few comments were normal. Friends from work saying congratulations, college roommates expressing excitement, that sort of thing. But then I started seeing names I recognized from family gatherings, and the tone was different. My cousin Rachel had written, "Wow, must be nice to have that kind of money while the rest of us are struggling." Uncle Mike, "Interesting timing for such a big purchase." Emma's college friend Brittany, who I'd met maybe twice in my life. Some people really know how to prioritize their spending. And then, right in the middle of all these passive-aggressive comments, was one from my Aunt Linda. "Sarah, your mother is very upset. You should call her." I sat there in my new bedroom, looking out at my new view of oak trees and hills, feeling like I'd been sucker punched. I'd shared good news, the biggest accomplishment of my life. And somehow, it had turned into a family crisis that was apparently my fault. My phone rang before I could decide what to do. Mom's ringtone. "Sarah Marie," she said the moment I answered, using my full name the way she did when I was 12 and had broken something important. "We need to talk." "Good morning to you too," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's wrong?" "What's wrong?" she repeated. And I could hear that edge in her voice that meant she was working herself up to being really angry. "What's wrong is that I'm finding out my daughter bought a house from Facebook posts and family members calling to ask me questions I can't answer." I took a deep breath. I bought a house. I was excited about it. So I shared some photos. I didn't realize that was a problem. "The problem," she said, speaking very slowly like she was explaining something to a child, "is that you apparently have enough money to buy property while your sister is drowning in student loans, and your father and I are worried about retirement, and you didn't think to mention this to anyone in your family." "My sister had her student loans paid off by her job signing bonus last year," I said, confused. "And what does my buying a house have to do with Dad's retirement?" There was a pause, and when Mom spoke again, her voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "Don't play dumb, Sarah. We know about the inheritance." "What inheritance?" "From Great-Aunt Margaret. The money she left you that you apparently decided to keep secret from everyone." I felt like the world had tilted sideways. "Mom, Great-Aunt Margaret died when I was 15. She left me her sewing machine and a set of china that I've never used. There was no inheritance." "Then where did the money come from?" she demanded. "Houses like that don't buy themselves, and we all know what you make at your job." The way she said, "what you make at your job," like my career was some kind of amusing hobby instead of the work I'd been building for years, made something snap inside me. "I got promoted," I said quietly. "I've been getting performance bonuses. I saved every penny for 2 years and qualified for a mortgage. I bought the house the same way most people buy houses, with hard work and careful planning." "Performance bonuses," she repeated skeptically. "Since when?" "Since I started actually trying to advance in my career instead of spending all my time and energy on family obligations that apparently don't matter anyway." The silence that followed was so long, I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I think you need to take a step back and consider how this looks, Sarah. While Emma has been building a respectable career and maintaining a serious relationship, you've been secretly hoarding money and making major life decisions without consulting anyone. It's selfish. It's not how families behave." "Consulting anyone?" I said, and I could hear my own voice getting higher. "Mom, you haven't asked me about my life in years. You don't know what kind of career I have, what my goals are, who I'm dating, what makes me happy or sad or excited. You send me $20 bills and cards and forget to invite me to family celebrations. When exactly was I supposed to consult you about my life choices?" "That's not true." "It is true," I interrupted. And for once in my life, I didn't apologize for cutting her off. "And you know it's true. The only reason you're upset about this house is because I did something significant without asking for your permission or financial help. Something that makes it obvious I don't need you the way you thought I did." I hung up on her. I had never hung up on my mother in my entire adult life. But I hung up on her and then immediately turned my phone completely off. My hands were shaking. Not from anger exactly, but from the adrenaline of finally saying things I'd been thinking for years but never had the courage to voice. I felt sick and exhilarated at the same time. I spent that Saturday working in my garden, or what would eventually be my garden. Mrs. Henderson had left behind some perennial flowers that were overgrown but still viable, and there was something soothing about digging in the dirt and pulling weeds and thinking about growing things instead of family drama. When I finally turned my phone back on Sunday evening, I had 37 missed calls and more text messages than I wanted to count. Most of them were from family members who'd apparently been recruited into whatever narrative Mom had constructed about my secret house purchase. The messages ranged from concerned, "Hey, just wanted to check on you after talking to your mom," to accusatory, "Really disappointed in how you're handling this situation," to bizarre, "Did you really inherit money from Aunt Margaret? Mom thought she left everything to charity." But the one that really got to me was from Emma herself. "Sarah, I don't understand why you're being so secretive and weird about everything. Mom is really hurt. This isn't like you. This isn't like you. I stared at that text for a long time, trying to figure out why it bothered me so much. Then I realized Emma was right. This wasn't like me. The old me would have called Mom back immediately, apologized for causing drama, maybe offered to help with whatever financial concerns she'd mentioned. The old me would have made myself smaller to make everyone else more comfortable. But the old me had been miserable. The old me had spent years waiting for crumbs of attention and affection from people who clearly didn't think I was worth their time or energy. The old me had lived in other people's shadows and called it family loyalty. This new version of me, the one who bought a house and hung up on her mother and wasn't automatically assuming that every family conflict was somehow her fault, felt scary but also real in a way I'd never experienced before. I turned my phone off again and didn't turn it back on until Monday morning. When I got to work that Monday, Janet called me into her office first thing. "Sarah," she said, looking at me with curiosity. "I've been getting some interesting phone calls." My stomach dropped. "Oh no. What kind of phone calls?" "The good kind," she said with a smile. "Apparently word is getting around about the Morrison campaign results, and some people are asking about poaching you, which tells me we need to have that career conversation sooner rather than later." She offered me another promotion, this one more significant, with a salary increase that would make my house payments feel comfortable instead of tight, and the possibility of eventually becoming a department head. "There's just one thing," she said as I was processing this incredible news. "This position would involve some travel. Maybe 20% of your time, visiting clients and overseeing campaign launches in other markets. Is that something you'd be interested in?" I thought about my new house, about the garden I was planning, and the renovations I wanted to tackle. Then I thought about spending 20% of my time in new cities, seeing new places, building a career that could take me anywhere I wanted to go. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "That sounds perfect." I spent the rest of that week in a strange bubble of professional success and family chaos. Every day at work brought new opportunities and recognition. Every evening brought more angry voicemails and passive-aggressive texts from various family members who seemed to think I owed them explanations for living my own life. The breaking point came on Friday when I got home from work to find Emma's car in my driveway. She was sitting on my front porch, looking perfectly put together in the way she always did, like she'd stepped out of a magazine about young professional women. When she saw me, she stood up with this expression that was part concern and part frustration. "Finally," she said, "do you know how hard it is to find this place? There's no cell service for like 10 miles. "Emma," I said, not moving from my car, "what are you doing here?" "I came to talk to you, since you're apparently not answering your phone anymore." I walked past her to unlock my front door, hyper-aware that this was the first time any member of my family had seen my house in person. "I answer my phone. I just don't answer it when people are calling to yell at me about how I spend my own money." "Nobody wants to yell at you," she said, following me inside. "We're just worried." She stopped talking abruptly, looking around my living room. I tried to see it through her eyes. The hardwood floors I'd refinished myself, the stone fireplace with a fire crackling in it, the built-in bookshelves filled with actual books instead of decorative objects, the windows that looked out over acres of land that belonged to me. "Wow," she said quietly. This is really nice, Sarah." "Thank you," I said, hanging my coat on the hook by the door. "Can I get you something to drink? Coffee? Water?" "Coffee would be good." She was still looking around, taking in details. How long have you been planning this? About 2 years, I said, leading her into the kitchen. Maybe a little longer if you count the dreaming phase. I made coffee in my French press, another small luxury I'd been able to afford since I stopped spending money on family gifts that were never reciprocated. And we sat at my kitchen table. The late afternoon light was coming through the windows, and everything felt surreal. "Sarah," Emma said after a few minutes of awkward silence, "I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." "Okay. Are you mad at us? At the family, I mean. Is this house thing, is it some kind of statement you're trying to make?" I looked at my sister across my kitchen table. My sister, who had been the center of my parents' attention for years, who had never once had to wonder if she was loved or valued or remembered. And I tried to figure out how to explain something she'd never experienced. "I'm not mad," I said finally, "but I am done." "Done with what?" "Done waiting for you all to remember I exist. Done pretending it doesn't hurt when you throw elaborate parties for your birthday while forgetting mine entirely. Done making excuses for why I'm never included in family celebrations or consulted about family decisions. Done being the supporting character in my own life." Emma looked genuinely shocked. "What are you talking about? We don't forget your birthday." I got up and walked to the junk drawer where I kept important papers. I pulled out a small stack of birthday cards, every card my parents had sent me for the past 5 years, and set them on the table in front of her. "Here," I said. "Here's how my family remembers my birthday." She picked up the cards, flipping through them. Generic drugstore cards with small bills tucked inside and hastily written messages. Nothing personal, nothing that showed they'd put any thought into what I might want or need or appreciate. Then I pulled out my phone and showed her Emma's birthday party photos from the past few years. The elaborate themes, the professional photography, the dozens of guests, the expensive venues. "This is how my family celebrates your birthday," I said. Emma stared at the photos for a long time, then looked back at the cards. "I didn't realize," she started, then trailed off. "You didn't realize because it wasn't happening to you," I said, sitting back down. "And that's not your fault. But it's also not my responsibility to keep pretending it's normal." "So you bought a house to prove a point?" "I bought a house because I wanted a house. Because I worked hard and saved money and qualified for a mortgage and found a place that makes me happy. The fact that it surprised everyone just shows how little attention you've all been paying to my actual life." We sat there in my kitchen as the sun set behind the hills, and I watched my sister process information that was apparently brand new to her. Finally, she said, "What can we do to fix this?" "Nothing," I said, and I meant it. "This isn't a problem that needs fixing. This is me building a life that works for me, with or without family approval." "But we want you in our lives." "Do you?" I interrupted. "Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like you want me available when you need something but invisible the rest of the time. And I'm not interested in that arrangement anymore." Emma left an hour later, clearly frustrated by my refusal to treat this as a temporary family spat that could be resolved with apologies and promises to do better. As I watched her drive away, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. For the first time in years, I'd told my family exactly how I felt without apologizing for it or trying to make them feel better about it. And the world hadn't ended. The next few months were the strangest of my life. It was like living in two completely different worlds, one where I was thriving professionally and personally, and another where I was apparently the villain in some ongoing family drama that I'd stopped paying attention to. At work, things kept getting better. The promotion Janet had offered turned out to be even more significant than I'd initially understood. I wasn't just getting a raise and some travel opportunities. I was being groomed to eventually take over the entire client services department when Janet retired in 3 years. "You've become indispensable," she told me during one of our monthly check-ins. "The Morrison people specifically requested you for their next campaign, and the Henderson Group wants to expand their contract based on the work you did last quarter." I was traveling about once a month now, usually for 3 or 4 days at a time. I'd been to Denver, Portland, Austin, and Phoenix, working with clients and learning how other markets handled challenges we dealt with at home. Every trip taught me something new about the business and showed me possibilities I'd never considered for my career. The best part was coming home to my house after each trip. No matter how nice the hotels were or how interesting the cities, walking through my front door and seeing my things in my space, smelling the wood smoke from my fireplace and hearing the quiet that only exists in rural places, it never got old. I'd been working on renovations slowly, learning as I went. I'd painted most of the interior myself, choosing colors that made me happy instead of safe neutrals that would appeal to hypothetical future buyers. The kitchen was going to need professional help, but I'd managed to update the bathroom with new tile and fixtures that transformed it from a pink nightmare into something clean and modern. My garden was coming along too. I'd spent weekends that spring planting vegetables and herbs, learning about soil composition and growing seasons, and which plants could handle the climate. There's something deeply satisfying about eating tomatoes you grew yourself, about cutting fresh basil for dinner and knowing exactly where it came from. I was also starting to make friends in Millbrook. Real friends. People who knew me as Sarah the neighbor, not Sarah, Emma's older sister. My closest neighbor, Mrs. Chen, was a retired teacher who'd moved to the country for the same reasons I had. Peace, space, the chance to grow things. We'd started having coffee together on Sunday mornings, sitting on one of our porches and talking about books and gardening, and the kind of renovations that make sense versus the kind that just waste money. "You seem different than when you first moved here," she told me one morning in late summer. "More settled, more yourself, if that makes sense." It made perfect sense. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like the person I actually was instead of the person I thought I should be for other people. Meanwhile, the family drama continued in the background like a soap opera I was no longer watching, but could still hear from the next room. I'd get periodic updates from various relatives who seemed determined to keep me informed about how hurt everyone was by my selfishness and secretive behavior. Aunt Linda called every few weeks with reports. "Your mother is still very upset about the house situation. She feels like you deliberately excluded her from an important decision." Or, "Emma thinks you're going through some kind of crisis. She's worried about you living out there all alone." These conversations always followed the same pattern. Linda would report on everyone else's feelings about my choices. I would explain that I was happy and successful and not particularly interested in their opinions about my life. And she would sigh and say something about how families are supposed to stick together. The thing is, I was sticking together. I was holding myself together in a way I'd never been able to do when I was constantly trying to manage other people's reactions to my existence. The real test came in October, almost a year after I'd bought the house. Emma's 26th birthday was approaching, and based on social media activity and overheard phone conversations at family dinners I still occasionally attended, it was going to be the biggest celebration yet. This time, the theme was around the world. because Emma and Tyler had gotten engaged during a trip to Italy, and they wanted to celebrate with foods and decorations representing all the places they'd traveled together. The party was being held at the Botanical Gardens, with different stations set up for different countries. They'd hired caterers, musicians, a photographer, and a videographer to document the whole thing. I found out about it the same way I'd learned about all the others, through social media posts and secondhand information. No invitation, no phone call, no acknowledgement that I might want to celebrate my sister's birthday despite our recent conflicts. But this time, instead of feeling hurt or excluded, I felt something unexpected. Relief. Because I'd already made plans for that weekend that were so much better than any family party could have been. Remember that travel component of my job? Well, I'd been asked to represent our company at a marketing conference in San Diego. It was a big deal. The kind of industry event where people make connections that shape their entire careers. Most of the attendees were department heads and company owners, people much more senior than me. But Janet had insisted I was ready for that level of networking. This is how you build the kind of career that gives you options, she told me when she approved the trip. 5 years from now, when you're ready to make your next move, the people you meet at this conference will remember you. The conference was the same weekend as Emma's party. I didn't plan it that way. The timing was pure coincidence. But it felt like the universe giving me a clear choice between my old life and my new one. I chose San Diego. The conference was incredible. 3 days of workshops and presentations and networking events with people who were passionate about the same work I was passionate about. I learned about new technologies and strategies that could revolutionize how we approached client campaigns. I met potential clients who were interested in working with our company specifically because of projects I'd managed. But the best part was a conversation I had on the last day with a woman named Patricia Webb, who owned a boutique marketing firm in Portland. We were sitting by the hotel pool during a break between sessions, talking about the challenges of building a career in a traditionally male-dominated field. "You know," she said, after I'd mentioned some of the clients I'd been working with, "I've been thinking about expanding my business, maybe opening a satellite office in California. I'd need someone with your kind of experience to run it, someone who understands both the creative and analytical sides of the business." "That sounds amazing," I said, trying to keep my voice casual even though my heart was racing. "What would something like that involve?" We talked for another hour about her vision for the expansion, what the role would entail, what kind of salary and benefits she'd be able to offer. By the time I got on the plane to fly home, I had her business card and a promise that she'd send me a formal job description within the week. I spent the flight staring out the window and thinking about possibilities I'd never imagined. Moving to Portland, running my own office, building something from the ground up instead of just maintaining what other people had created. It was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. When I got home Sunday night, I had 14 missed calls and 43 text messages, all related to my absence from Emma's party. The messages ranged from worried, "Where are you? No one has heard from you all weekend," to angry, "Your behavior is becoming embarrassing to the whole family." But the one that stood out was from Emma herself. "Sarah, I don't know what's wrong with you lately, but missing my engagement celebration is unforgivable. We need to have a serious conversation about your priorities." I read that message 3 times, sitting in my kitchen with a cup of tea and the sound of crickets coming through the open windows. Then I deleted it without responding. Because here's what Emma and the rest of my family didn't understand. My priorities had changed. They were no longer focused on earning approval from people who'd made it clear I wasn't worth their time or attention. They were focused on building a life that made me proud of myself. The job offer from Patricia came through the following Wednesday, exactly as promised. The salary was 40% more than I was making at my current job, with full relocation assistance and the opportunity to have equity in the business if it performed well. The position would start after the new year, giving me time to finish my current projects and train my replacement. I accepted it immediately. That evening, I called Janet to give my notice. She was disappointed, but not surprised, and she offered to write recommendations that would help me succeed in the new role. "You've grown so much since I've known you," she said. 2 years ago, I never would have imagined you taking a risk like this. It's inspiring to watch. After we hung up, I sat on my front porch with a glass of wine, looking out over land that would soon belong to someone else, and tried to figure out how I felt about leaving the house I'd worked so hard to buy. Surprisingly, I felt okay about it. The house had served its purpose. It had shown me that I could accomplish big things on my own, that I didn't need anyone's permission or support to build the life I wanted. Now it was time for the next adventure. I put the house on the market the following Monday. The realtor who'd helped me buy it was excited about the improvements I'd made and confident we could get significantly more than I'd originally paid. "You've got great instincts for this," she told me as we walked through the updated spaces. "Have you ever thought about flipping houses as a side business?" I hadn't, but I added it to the mental list of possibilities that kept growing as I got more comfortable with taking risks and trying new things. The house sold in 6 days to a young couple from the city who fell in love with it the same way I had. They offered full asking price and wanted to close before Christmas, which would give me time to pack and move to Portland before starting my new job. I still hadn't told my family about any of these changes, the job offer, the house sale, the move. I'm not sure why I was keeping it secret, except that it felt important to have everything settled before dealing with their inevitable reactions. The opportunity to tell them came at Thanksgiving dinner, which I'd agreed to attend despite all the ongoing tension. It seemed like the right time and place to share major life news, and I thought maybe the holiday setting would encourage everyone to be more supportive than they'd been about previous decisions. I was wrong. "You're moving to Portland?" Mom said, setting down her fork with the kind of deliberate care that meant she was trying not to lose her temper in front of everyone. "When exactly were you planning to mention this?" "I'm mentioning it now," I said calmly. "The job is an incredible opportunity, and I think Portland will be a great place to live for the next few years." "Portland?" Dad said, looking confused. "Why Portland? What's wrong with staying here where your family is?" I looked around the table at my extended family, aunts, uncles, cousins who had gathered for what I now realized would be my last Thanksgiving in this house, in this city, possibly in this version of my life. They were all staring at me with expressions ranging from shock to disapproval to something that might have been concern. "There's nothing wrong with staying here," I said carefully. "But there's also nothing keeping me here. I've been offered an incredible opportunity to run my own office, to build something from scratch. It's the kind of career move that could change my entire future." "But what about your house?" Emma asked. "You just bought it a year ago. You spent all that time fixing it up." "I sold it," I said simply. "It sold in 6 days for significantly more than I paid for it. The equity, plus my savings, plus the relocation package from the new job, means I'll be able to buy something even better in Portland." The silence that followed was so complete, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. The same clock that had marked time through countless family gatherings where I'd felt invisible. Finally, my Aunt Linda spoke up. "Sarah, honey, this seems very sudden. Are you sure you're not making a rash decision because you're upset about family things? I'm not upset, I said. And I realized as I said it that it was true. I wasn't upset anymore. I was just done. I'm making decisions based on what's best for my career and my happiness. The same way everyone else at this table makes their decisions. But moving across the country? Mom said, her voice tight. That's so drastic. What if you don't like it? What if the job doesn't work out? You'll be so far from family. I looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to remember the last time she'd asked about my happiness when I wasn't making a decision she disagreed with. The last time she'd shown interest in my career before it inconvenienced her in some way. Mom, I said gently, you've missed my birthday for 5 years running. You've excluded me from every major family celebration during that time. You didn't know I'd been promoted, didn't know about my bonuses, didn't know I was house hunting or that I'd bought a house until I posted photos on social media. Exactly how is being physically closer to family helping either of us if we're not actually close? That's not fair, Emma interjected. We've been dealing with our own lives, our own challenges. Tyler's job, the engagement, planning the wedding. I know, I said, cutting her off. You've been busy. Everyone's been busy. And that's fine. People have different priorities. But you can't be upset about me moving away from relationships that don't really exist anyway. Uncle Mike cleared his throat. Sarah, I think what everyone's trying to say is that family is important. You don't just walk away from family because things get a little complicated. A little complicated? I repeated, feeling my carefully maintained calm starting to crack. Uncle Mike, when was the last time anyone in this family asked how I was doing? Not about my house or my job or my decisions that affect other people, but just how I was doing. When was the last time anyone invited me to something without me having to hear about it through social media first? I looked around the table, waiting for an answer. No one spoke. The job in Portland starts January 3rd, I continued. I'll be moving the week after Christmas. I wanted to tell everyone in person, together, so there wouldn't be any confusion about my timeline or my reasons. What about Emma's wedding? Mom asked suddenly. It's in June. You'll miss Emma's wedding. I turned to look at my sister, who had the grace to look embarrassed. Emma, I said quietly, am I invited to your wedding? She opened her mouth, then closed it, then looked at Tyler as if he might have an answer. Finally, she said, of course you're invited. You're my sister. Have I been invited? I pressed. Have you sent me a save the date? Have we talked about the wedding party or the guest list or anything wedding related that didn't involve me finding out about it accidentally? The invitations haven't gone out yet, she said defensively. Emma, you've been engaged for 8 months. You've planned an around-the-world engagement party, booked a venue, chosen a date, ordered a dress, and posted about 17 different wedding-related celebrations on Instagram. In all that time, the topic of whether or not your only sibling would be involved in any of it just never came up. The silence stretched so long, it became painful. Finally, Tyler, bless him for trying, said, Sarah, I think there have been some misunderstandings. Maybe we could all sit down after the holidays and... No, I said, standing up. Tyler, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but there haven't been misunderstandings. There have been choices, and now I'm making my own choices. I walked to the coat closet and pulled out my jacket. Behind me, I could hear urgent whispered conversations starting to break out around the table. Sarah, wait, Dad called out. You can't just leave in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner. I turned back to face him. Dad, I've been leaving in the middle of family gatherings for years. The only difference is that now I'm doing it literally instead of just emotionally. But what about dessert? Mom asked. And there was something so plaintive in her voice that I almost reconsidered everything. I made your favorite pie. I looked at her. This woman who had forgotten my birthday 5 years running but remembered that I liked apple pie with the crumb topping. What's my favorite pie, Mom? She blinked. Apple with the crumb topping. That's Emma's favorite pie, I said gently. I don't really like pie at all. I haven't since I was about 10 years old. I let that sit for a moment, watching the realization cross her face. Save me some turkey, I said, trying to lighten the mood. I'll take leftovers home. I drove back to my empty house, my sold house that wouldn't be mine much longer, and sat in the kitchen I'd painted myself, looking out at the garden I'd planted myself, thinking about the strange momentum of major life changes. 6 months ago, I'd been someone who waited for family approval, who measured my worth by other people's attention, who kept myself small to avoid conflict. Now I was someone who hung up on her mother, bought a house, sold a house, took a job across the country, and walked out of Thanksgiving dinner when the conversation became dishonest. I wasn't sure which version of myself was real, or if maybe they both were, or if the truth was somewhere in between. But I knew which version felt more like home. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Sarah, this is Tyler. I wanted to apologize for tonight and to tell you that you're right about a lot of things. Emma and I would really like you to be in our wedding, if you're willing. Would you be open to talking about it when things are less heated? I stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'd be happy to talk, but I want you to know that my moving to Portland isn't negotiable. If you want me in your wedding, it'll have to work around my new life, not the other way around. His response came quickly. Understood. And congratulations on the job. It sounds like an amazing opportunity. That night, I packed 3 more boxes, made a list of everything I needed to do before the move. It was a long list, but for the first time in months, I felt excited about the future instead of anxious about it. The weeks between Thanksgiving and Christmas passed in a blur of paperwork, packing, and the strange rituals of leaving a life behind. I gave notice at my apartment, transferred my utilities, arranged for the moving truck, said goodbye to neighbors I'd barely gotten to know. Mrs. Chen helped me pack my garden tools and gave me seedlings from her own plants to take to Portland. Start small, she advised, but start immediately. A garden is a sign that you believe in the future. Work threw me a going-away party that was both touching and surreal. Janet made a speech about watching me grow from someone who kept her head down to someone willing to take big risks for bigger rewards. You're going to do incredible things in Portland, she said, raising her glass. And when you're running your own agency in 5 years, remember where you learned to be brave. The few family members who reached out during those weeks were supportive, if confused. Aunt Linda called to wish me luck and to let me know she thought I was making the right choice, even if the timing felt dramatic. Sometimes you have to make a clean break to get clean air, she said. Emma texted occasionally with wedding updates and tentative questions about my availability for various events. I answered honestly. Yes, I could probably fly back for the bachelorette party if she wanted me there. Yes, I'd be honored to be a bridesmaid if she was serious about including me. No, I couldn't help with day of setup because I'd be flying in the night before. Mom and Dad didn't call at all. On my last day of work, Patricia called to check in about the move and to let me know how excited she was to get started. The Portland office is going to be something special, she said. I can feel it. and I think you're exactly the right person to make it happen. That evening, I walked through my empty house one final time. The hardwood floors I'd refinished gleamed in the late afternoon light. The kitchen I'd dreamed of updating still had its 1930s charm, but felt brighter somehow, more spacious. The garden beds I'd planted were dormant for winter, but full of promise for spring growth that someone else would witness. I'd been afraid that leaving would feel like failure, like I was giving up on something important. Instead, it felt like graduation, like I'd learned everything this chapter of my life had to teach me, and now it was time to apply those lessons somewhere new. The moving truck came the next morning. I supervised the loading of boxes and furniture and plants, signed paperwork, handed over keys to the realtor who would coordinate with the new owners. Then I got in my car, packed with everything I couldn't bear to put on the truck, and started driving west. I stopped once at a rest area about 2 hours out of town and took a photo of the view behind me, rolling hills and farmland disappearing into hazy distance. Then I turned around and took a photo of the road ahead, empty and full of possibility. I posted both photos on social media with a simple caption: "Leaving home to find home. Portland, here I come." The comments that followed were overwhelmingly positive. Friends from college expressing excitement and envy, co-workers wishing me luck, acquaintances saying they'd always wanted to visit the Pacific Northwest. There were a few family comments too. Cousins and aunts expressing love and support, promising to visit once I got settled. Nothing from my parents. Nothing from Emma. But for the first time in years, that silence didn't hurt. It just felt like information, like confirmation that I was making choices based on my own values instead of other people's expectations. I drove the rest of the way to Portland with music loud and windows cracked despite the cold, feeling something I'd almost forgotten was possible. Pure, uncomplicated excitement about my own future.